Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into one of the most, I think, powerful and contradictory forces in contemporary fiction, the revenge romance.
hmm Is that fascinating point where, the guaranteed satisfaction of a sweet love story just collides head on with this dark, almost visceral drive for pure comeuppance.
It creates a huge emotional pull, doesn't it?
It really does. For you, the listener, our mission today is to decode this whole phenomenon.
And we've got a lot to work with here.
We do. We're using sources that range from uh, literary theory on tropes,
Mhm.
some really intense dark romance book reviews, all the way to self-help philosophy on karma.
And crucially, we're also looking at some shocking deep dives into true crime media about romance scams.
Yeah, that's where it gets very real.
So that's a huge spectrum. We're aiming to uncover why we crave fictional retribution so intensely, and then sort of hold that desire up against the complex, often devastating reality of seeking justice when your emotions have been weaponized against you.
And to do that, we have to start with the foundational tension. In romance fiction, there's a fundamental contract with the reader. The ultimate expectation is the happily ever after, the HEA.
Right, always.
But if your protagonist is primarily fueled by pain and hate, which is, the engine of a revenge plot,
Yeah.
how does that story possibly deliver a satisfying HEA?
That's the core dramatic question of the genre, isn't it?
Right.
We know the destination, but the path is just paved with malice.
Precisely. The HEA guarantee, it transforms the revenge plot. It means the vengeance can never be a truly devastating self-destructive mission.
Because it has to yield to love in the end.
It has to. If love doesn't win in that final act, it fails the reader contract. It stops being a romance novel.
It becomes a tragedy.
Exactly. The revenge, therefore, is just the mechanism. It's the conflict designed to push two people who are meant to be together into this all-consuming, high-stakes negotiation of wills.
So let's start with the architecture of that. Before all the darkness, before the payback, there's the trope. When writers talk about tropes, they aren't necessarily talking about a cliche that's like tired or overused or
Yeah.
something much more functional.
It's absolutely functional. A story trope is a totally expected situation that moves the narrative forward.
So a kind of narrative shortcut.
It is, essentially. It's a familiar scenario that readers actively seek out. It's what provides that moment of cognitive comfort, that feeling one writer describes as making readers squeal, "Yes, I knew it."
Yeah.
So it's not just predictable, it's comfortably predictable. It's a signpost pointing directly toward that inevitable romantic resolution.
The psychological appeal is really rooted in anxiety management then.
Totally.
We know the real world is uncertain, but when we pick up a romance book, we just know the main characters will overcome all the obstacles.
Exactly. The trope, then, is the specific, delicious hurdle they have to clear.
So think about the classic heat generators. You mentioned forced proximity.
A classic. This is the setup where two characters, who might be rivals or just completely indifferent, are suddenly forced into an enclosed space.
The lift, the small apartment.
Or the infamous only one bed scenario in a hotel room.
The only one bed trope is so powerful because it just instantly eliminates that physical distance the characters usually hide behind.
And it forces a decision. The characters are letting their heads, or maybe their past hurts, rule their hearts. But when they're suddenly inches apart,
All those logical defenses just melt away.
right, they literally can't fight the physical tension any longer.
And what about the less traumatic tropes? The ones that are, just as effective for generating that heat?
Well, there's sexual tension, which is often achieved through these tiny physical interactions. The sources point to the classic accidental touch.
Yeah.
Two strangers bending down to pick up a fallen item, say a pencil or a briefcase, and their fingers brush.
Instant electricity.
It's instantaneous attraction presented as destiny. It establishes that vital spark without a single word being spoken.
So the trope's primary function is to create tension and pace, all while the reader is holding on to that HEA guarantee.
Yes, the entire structure is built on the writer pushing the characters together, then finding ingenious ways to rip them apart again.
The misunderstanding, the family feud, the secret identity.
Or the revenge plot, and this heightens the stakes. It ensures that when they finally do get together, it feels like a genuine, hard-won victory.
That struggle makes the final union that much sweeter.
Exponentially sweeter. It gives the reader that powerful feeling of satisfaction.
And to really appreciate where a revenge narrative can land, we have to recognize the sheer scale of the romance genre. I mean, it's massive, it's incredibly structured, and these revenge themes can just pop up anywhere.
We can broadly survey the landscape by looking at how subgenres are defined, usually by time, setting, or tone.
Okay.
So let's start with time and setting distinctions, because they dictate the external environment for the conflict.
The historical category is always interesting to me because its definition is just constantly sliding forward.
It is, isn't it? Historical romance traditionally covered everything from, like, Regency balls to Victorian London. But now, according to the sources, the category is functionally defined as anything set prior to the current year.
Which means we now have historical settings in the late 20th century, like the 1990s.
Exactly. The 90s are now historical romance.
That's wild. That rapid recategorization is a signal, I think. It highlights how quickly our sense of the past moves and how genre conventions have to adapt.
Absolutely. And it forces writers to work harder to make established tropes feel fresh in a more contemporary setting.
Right.
Then you have the more genre-bending settings, primarily the fantasy sphere.
Which is huge.
It is. It encompasses sci-fi, dystopian, and paranormal romance. And this allows writers to take classic emotional conflicts like a forbidden love and set them against, world-ending stakes.
Or involve characters with supernatural powers. It just fundamentally escalates the risk of something like a revenge plot.
Absolutely.
And what about the more accessible contemporary settings?
Rom-com is built on the premise that a series of amusing, often embarrassing events has to happen before the couple finally gets together.
The conflict there isn't usually high-stakes death threats. It's more professional rivalry or social awkwardness.
Usually. And let's not forget the Christmas genre. It has become this dominant category purely due to reader demand for stories set during the festive season.
Which demand instant high-heat resolutions all wrapped up in a seasonal bow.
You got it.
Moving to tone, we see this huge contrast between the explicit and the clean.
On the darker end, you have erotic romance, where the plot revolves around sex. This often includes BDSM, kink, or deep power dynamic.
Which is a natural home for the revenge trope.
A very natural home, because the characters are frequently driven by power and control, so that transition to vengeance to lovers is seamless. And crucially, this genre includes a large percentage of LGBTQ narratives.
And on the opposite side of that spectrum, we have religious or spiritual fiction.
Right, often termed clean romance.
So no explicit content.
Minimal or non-existent. The core conflict often involves characters spiritually finding themselves or overcoming external non-physical obstacles, but still finding that deep emotional connection.
And finally, the demographic focus, like young adult YA.
Which concentrates on the dramas of first love. But the beauty of this framework is how adaptable it is. A book like Outlander successfully combines steamy, fantasy, and historical elements.
Right, it's all of them. Or you can have a title like Red, White, and Royal Blue, which is an LGBTQ rom-com YA novel.
Exactly. The point is that these building blocks are structural tools. And no matter how many you combine, revenge, history, fantasy, the fundamental contract remains.
Love must win.
Love must win.
Okay, so now we layer on the element of darkness. The cornerstone of the revenge romance is almost always the enemies to lovers trope.
Always.
It relies entirely on that intoxicating idea of a thin line between love and hate.
That thin line is the perfect narrative engine for vengeance. I mean, if the characters hated each other for petty reasons, the tension would be low.
But the revenge plot ensures the conflict is existential, it's personal, it's high stakes.
Right. The goal is always to demonstrate how that initial furious hatred transforms into an all-consuming mutual obsession. This high-octane dynamic guarantees the couple has to engage in a relentless struggle just to admit their feelings.
And in the niche subgenre of dark romance, this conflict morphs into a very defined dynamic. Vengeance to lovers.
This is what feeds the incredible popularity of these wish lists you see for narratives involving the heroine scorned, or very commonly, the hero uses heroine for revenge.
Dark romance actively leverages this conflict.
It does. It wraps it in themes of crime, secrets, moral ambiguity, and often non-consensual elements that are navigated within the safe framework of fiction.
Let's look deeply at an example that our sources cited, Bittersweet Revenge. This book seems to be a masterclass in how that HEA imperative ultimately overrides the dark plot mechanics.
This is an excellent case study. This particular novel is a male-male dark romance, so it features a central relationship between two men, an MM romance, set against the backdrop of a mafia or crime world.
Okay.
The protagonist, Dean, has spent years meticulously planning revenge against a guy named Tiernan O'Shea, whose father killed Dean's dad.
So Dean's strategy is classic vengeance. He's using the secret identity trope. He infiltrates Tiernan's life.
He does. He enrolls at Ashford University, planning to befriend Tiernan, gain his trust, and then get close enough to the father, Sloane O'Shea, to execute his ultimate payback.
And what's fascinating is the narrative self-awareness here.
It is. Dean consistently references literary archetypes, particularly citing the Count of Monte Cristo.
Ah, okay.
And he does this to remind himself, and crucially the reader, that this plot is still about revenge, even as the narrative starts bending hard toward romance. The author uses this external literary reference as a kind of intellectual shorthand for the vengeance theme.
But the whole elaborate plan, the years of stalking and preparation, it just hits the wall of instant mutual obsession, a phenomenon that really only exists in fiction.
Absolutely does.
Mm.
Dean discovers that Tiernan, far from being some innocent mark, is brutal, possessive, and extremely powerful, but also fiercely loyal to those he deems worthy of love.
So Dean recognizes himself in Tiernan.
He sees a mirror. They are both angry, power-driven men. And when they finally connect, the isolation Dean felt his whole life just vanishes.
The emotional stakes change instantly.
Completely. Dean realizes that executing his plan means losing the only man who has ever truly seen him. And this is where the title Bittersweet Revenge earns its name.
Because the romantic connection becomes so strong that the revenge plot, just fades away.
According to some reviewers, it completely vanishes in the middle of the book. It's replaced by this all-consuming chemistry.
And that just highlights the HEA imperative. The dark themes, the violence, the morally gray characters, they're primarily there to create this high-voltage attraction. The appeal centers on these possessive, obsessive main characters.
The language used in these reviews and tropes lists confirms this completely. Readers seek out characters who display absolute protective ownership.
Signaled by phrases like, touch him and so, the skull emoji.
Touch him and you die, yeah. Or marking, claiming, obsessing, and the intense desire to literally possess the other person. I want you to smell like me all day.
It's the ultimate fictional redemption arc, where the hate is immediately proven to be misplaced. The characters are perfect for each other precisely because of their shared darkness.
They find solace in shared brokenness. Dean realizes his hatred was misdirected at the son, and he refocuses on the true villain, the father. But by then, the relationship is the primary motivation.
This revenge motivation isn't just confined to the dark side of the street, though.
Not at all.
It's also everywhere in contemporary romance, often focusing on comeuppance for a cheating ex. This has to be one of the most satisfying forms of passive revenge for the reader.
It delivers karma without any of the legal or moral fallout. The cheating comeuppance trope is satisfying because the protagonist often doesn't need to actively seek revenge.
Right. The ex's downfall just happens because of their own fundamental flaws.
Or the universe just aligns the planets for the wronged party.
Let's explore those specific comeback strategies because they really define the emotional satisfaction.
Okay, we have several excellent examples. Consider this scenario in If I Never Met You. The FMC, she's deeply hurt by a long-term breakup, made worse because she has to see her ex every day at the same law firm.
Ugh, the worst.
So she decides to engage in a fake dating scheme.
The typical fake dating scheme is usually about convenience, right? But here, the motive is purely a controlled comeback.
It is. She doesn't fake date to sabotage him, but to keep him from pitying her and, yeah, maybe make him a little jealous. But the true, delicious revenge comes in the form of professional comeuppance.
She has a promotion.
She makes partner and becomes his boss. This fulfills the revenge fantasy in a legally safe and professionally triumphant way. The career level up is the most potent form of payback.
And then there is the ultimate relationship betrayal turned into a romantic victory.
The sources cite Contractually Yours, where the FMC's fiancé cheats on her with her half-sister.
Oh, wow. Double betrayal.
A narrative twist. She marries the cheating ex's brother instead.
Oh, that is cold.
It not only causes maximum discomfort for the ex and the half-sister, but it establishes an immediate, powerful new connection based on that shared familial tension. It's an instant reset that uses the past injury to launch the true love story.
We also see this idea of two victims uniting to find their HEA.
That's the dynamic in the sapphic rom-com, never ever getting back together.
Oh!
Two women, Maya and Sky, discover they were both victims of the same manipulative ex-boyfriend, Jordan.
He was two-timing them.
He was.
Yeah.
And Maya originally planned to expose him on a reality dating show called Second Chance Romance.
But the narrative surprise is that she and Sky fall for each other instead.
Yes. They find their HEA, with the person who truly understands the depth of their original betrayal. That shared experience creates this intense instant bond and provides a powerful emotional victory over the man who thought he could control them both.
So, whether the plot involves a high-stakes mafia standoff or a marriage of convenience, the revenge trope is just a highly effective mechanism designed solely to set the stage for a new, stronger, and ultimately successful romantic bond.
The conflict is just the high-stakes door that delivers the love.
So if tropes are so essential to the genre and yet so predictable, we know the enemies to lovers pair will end up together, we know the person wronged will find happiness. The writer's main challenge must be preventing the story from feeling trite.
Yeah, is the perpetual negotiation writers have with their audience. Readers demand the formula.
Right.
A believable scenario, followed by intense specific conflict misunderstandings, forced proximity, high-stakes revenge, and then the inevitable satisfying resolution and the HEA by Act 3.
But if the execution is too formulaic, the reader gets bored.
Exactly. The goal is always to keep the trope fresh and the readers guessing, and most importantly, swooning.
Our sources suggest 3 powerful strategies that writers use to achieve this originality, to move beyond that standard template. The first is introducing an unexpected outcome.
This strategy really reflects the evolving norms within the romance community. In the past, the conventional resolution for a love triangle was simple. The protagonist chooses one person, the other is left behind.
But now writers are intentionally breaking that expected binary resolution.
They are. How does that play out on the page? Instead of a binary choice, they shift the dynamic. We see this with the inclusion of bisexual characters, like the leads in Never Ever Getting Back Together.
Which immediately breaks the expectation of a straight outcome.
Right. And more dramatically, writers introduce polyamorous relationships, sometimes structured as a throuple.
For the listener, a throuple is basically a loving relationship involving 3 people. That immediately complicates the expected HEA structure.
It does. It takes a classic high-tension setup, the love triangle, and flips the resolution from I must choose one to I can love them both. And this is highly satisfying for readers interested in challenging traditional relationship norms.
The second strategy is changing the setting completely, which forces the writer to reinvent the obstacles.
Yeah, you take a core, universally recognizable emotional plot, like a revenge tragedy or a forbidden love, and you transplant it into a wildly different world.
Okay, give me an example.
The sources suggest asking, what if you take the high-stakes familial feud of Romeo and Juliet and set it in a dystopian colony on Mars? Or embed the revenge tragedy in a world populated by alien species?
The core emotional conflict, the hate, the betrayal, the yearning, that all remains the same. But the external environment forces the writer to be so much more creative.
New environmental factors, new political systems, new species, they all demand fresh world building and introduce creative new obstacles and solutions that the reader hasn't seen before.
It keeps the trope recognizable, but the stakes feel entirely unique. And the third strategy is mixing up the genres.
Basically embedding the romance trope into a story that isn't primarily defined by the romance genre.
So you can use the intense emotional tension a romance trope provides without having to guarantee the romance genre's required outcome.
You're leveraging the reader's emotional investment in the relationship drama, even if that drama is secondary to the main plot.
And the prime example for this is a huge series.
The Hunger Games.
Right.
Suzanne Collins introduces a clear, effective love triangle between the protagonist, Katniss, and her 2 partners, Peeta and Gale. That dynamic creates incredible tension for millions of readers.
But The Hunger Games is fundamentally a dystopian young adult series. It's driven by a David and Goliath trope. The poor underdog against the powerful empire, not a love story.
And that's the key. The love triangle functions as a powerful tool for character development and decision-making, even though the romantic resolution is secondary to the survival plot.
It enhances the primary plot, but it doesn't define the genre.
Which allows the writer to utilize the power of the trope without being bound by the HEA contract.
So this all moves us naturally into a kind of philosophical divide, doesn't it? Pivoting from fictional retribution back to how we approach conflict in our own lives.
This philosophical pivot is crucial because it contrasts the fictional quick fix with the real-world long game. We see 2 very distinct reactions to being wronged.
Okay.
First, there's the active revenge mindset, the one that sells the dark romance. Revenge never looked this good.
That view focuses on immediate retribution, reclaiming power instantly, and often, lethal action or extreme financial ruin for the person who wronged you. It's that satisfying, short-term dopamine hit of seeing the villain fall.
And then there is the much more profound and challenging philosophical path, the passive comeback.
Right.
This is rooted in the philosophy that the best revenge is no revenge. This viewpoint demands self-worth and healing, trusting in external forces.
Encapsulated by the belief that karma already knows their address.
Exactly.
This sounds like a powerful redirection of energy. So instead of burning yourself up with hatred, you reinvest that destructive emotion back into yourself.
That's it. The source material emphasizes focusing your energy on leveling up. And this is not a passive surrender. It's an active choice to prioritize personal growth, self-worth, and healing over retribution.
And what does that leveling up practically entail? I mean, beyond just abstract self-help phrases.
It means making tangible changes. It could be dedicating oneself to therapy to process the trauma of betrayal, aggressively pursuing career goals, redefining success on one's own terms, or focusing intensely on physical and mental health.
So the idea is that you become materially, emotionally, or professionally better off because of the experience, not despite it.
Yes. The contrast is profound. Active revenge gives the immediate, satisfying narrative closure of watching the bad guy fall.
While the passive comeback guarantees the protagonist's long-term success.
True strength in this philosophy is shown in the act of rising above, leading to that powerful assertion, "No revenge because I grew while you stayed the same."
You choose not to engage in that petty downward spiral of retaliation.
You protect your peace and let your success become the loudest statement. True power, in this philosophical sense, is not in retaliation, but in embracing peace and self-discovery. Revenge just prolongs the negativity.
While self-respect ensures the forever part of the HEA, a peaceful, successful future that transcends the trauma. We've established these neat, morally flexible revenge plots of fiction where the protagonist, however dark their past, ultimately finds love and justice. That philosophical discussion of choice is put to a terrible test when the fictional romance plot becomes a real-life weapon of fraud.
This is where we make the sharp pivot into the devastating reality of romance fraud. Con artists like Simon Leviev, the infamous Tinder Swindler.
Or Todd Dean, the selfie scammer.
They prey on the most universal human desire, the need to be loved, the need to find a true partner. They twist that emotional craving, turning sweet words and picture-perfect promises, those classic trope-like setups we love, into weapons.
They execute a meticulous plan. They love bomb the victim, build absolute, unwavering trust, and then they manipulate that vulnerability to cause devastating financial and emotional loss.
And the aftermath is where the fight for justice begins. And it is messy. It's tireless, and it is far from the neat Act 3 resolution we demand in fiction.
So we look to individuals like Cecily Fulteux, a victim of the Tinder Swindler, who became a crusader against these romance predators.
She recognized that her trauma was a pattern. She realized that the only way to stop these men from operating with impunity was to organize.
Her work, often done alongside private investigators like Brianne Joseph, is driven by this deep desire to prevent others from suffering. Their primary task is gathering these extensive dossiers of evidence.
And then pushing law enforcement to take action.
And that initial contact with law enforcement is a massive hurdle, isn't it? Because their reaction is so often to minimize the crime.
It is. Our sources highlight that police often dismiss these cases as a domestic matter, suggesting the victim file a civil claim or just expressing impatience.
The institutional misogyny and dismissal of victim stories, it often means that the victims themselves are forced to become their own primary investigators.
Their own prosecutors, really.
But when true crime media tries to package this real-world struggle into a neat, satisfying narrative, that's where the media itself risks compounding the betrayal. Let's discuss the critique of the follow-up show, Love, Con, Revenge, which focused on the selfie scammer, Todd Dean.
The show was heavily criticized for being manipulative and, frankly, manufactured. It tried to impose a classic fictional narrative structure where none existed.
And in doing so, it completely rewrote history.
Systematically erasing the incredible, hard-won investigative work done by the women who actually drove the case.
So the fictionalization started right at the structural level. The opening scene of the show, where the victim Jill supposedly calls Cicely for help, was entirely fabricating.
Entirely. It was designed purely to create a dramatic, made-for-TV phone call that centered the hosts. In reality, the show's producers reached out to Jill after the story was already widely known.
So Jill had already gone to court multiple times. She knew exactly where the scammer was.
He had stacks of evidence. But the producers needed a scripted beginning that looked like the classic discovery trope, even if it wasn't true.
And the erasure of the victim's efforts continued throughout the production. The very name, the selfie scammer, was coined by one of the first women involved, Roxy.
Who was then minimized or excluded from the final narrative.
Wow.
That pattern just repeated with the evidence collection. The victim, Jill, had already compiled an incredibly detailed, comprehensive spreadsheet of victims, complete with contact info and financial details.
Yet the show pretended the hosts were the ones discovering these women, Ashina Karen, who had been involved in the real-life investigation for years.
Right.
So those scenes of the hosts or the PIs supposedly searching for Todd Dean on LinkedIn or pretending they didn't know his location, those were all manufactured investigations designed purely to artificially build suspense for TV.
That is the direct accusation from the women who did the actual work. The media narrative avoided the messy, tedious reality of investigative work, the paperwork, the filings, the civil actions, and instead focused on these manufactured searching scenes.
Trying to replicate the excitement of a fictional crime thriller.
And they even staged a confrontation with Todd outside a poker game, trying to force an Act 3 climax that just didn't materialize organically.
It just highlights how deeply the media relies on those fictional tropes. They believe the audience won't trust or enjoy the justice unless it looks like a classic detective story.
And it creates a tremendous ethical conflict. The media narrative risks re-victimization by exploiting sensitive information.
The most egregious example cited was the use of sensitive financial information.
It was. Jill shared details about her daughter's trust fund during filming, making it explicitly clear to the producers she was not comfortable with it being aired.
And the producers aired it anyway.
They did. They prioritized sensational content over respecting the trauma of the survivors.
And then the media took credit for the actual results. They acted like they had single-handedly uncovered evidence that forced Todd Dean into bankruptcy.
And none of that was true. The FBI and police were already involved long before filming began.
So Todd's bankruptcy and the sale of his business were the direct result of the tireless, unscripted, and unpaid efforts of the victim network.
Jill, Roxy, Karen, Sheena. The media narrative risked diminishing the true heroes by focusing on self-congratulation rather than the messy reality that justice is often anticlimactic and hard-won.
In real life, the confrontation with a scammer doesn't end with a passionate kiss or a moral surrender.
Yeah.
It often ends with them just walking away or filing another bankruptcy claim. That's terrible television, but that is the reality these victims faced.
So what does this all mean? We've traveled from the neat, morally negotiable revenge plots of dark romance fiction, where instant passion overrides years of plotting,
All the way to the emotionally complex, hard-fought battles against real-world predators. What stands out to me is that powerful, universal human desire for justice and comeuppance. In fiction, the HEA guarantees us hope that love truly won after all, even if it had to engage in an all-consuming battle with hate to get there.
The revenge plot is merely the highest, most high-stakes form of romantic conflict.
Exactly.
But in true crime, the comeback is powered by a different kind of connection. It's the community and resilience of fellow survivors.
A found family.
It is. And the justice achieved is often a slow, arduous process that requires massive emotional and investigative labor, proving that the victim network did the hard, unscripted work to achieve the necessary consequences for the scammer.
The desire to regain control, to reclaim the narrative, is so powerful in both spheres. It circles back to that core philosophical choice, doesn't it?
It does. True strength is shown not in getting even, but in rising above the person who wronged you and focusing on your own narrative success.
Which brings us to our final takeaway for you, the listener.
In romance, the protagonists find their perfect match. The true love guarantees the happily ever after, and that structure satisfies our deep need for narrative closure.
But in the real-world fight against betrayal and fraud, the ultimate power move is reclaiming your own life. Self-respect, personal growth, and success ensure the forever that follows the revenge plot, whether the ex or the scammer gets their fictional karma or not. Living your best life, focused on growth and peace, is the victory that no fraudulent script or manufactured reality TV show can touch.
If you are focused on leveling up and building your own forever, you simply don't have time for revenge. And that self-discovery is the most powerful narrative any of us can write.